My great-great-great-great-grandmother, Vale, was born in 1888 in the southern district of Kau on the Big Island of Hawaii. She was born at the end of the decade that saw more changes in these Hawaiian islands than any other decade that people had ever known. For 10 years before that, in 1778, Captain James Cook arrived and introduced Hawaii to the world. And within 10 years, ships were coming here from China, from America, from England. All over the world, people now knew about Hawaii. And it was the perfect place right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean for people to stop and refuel and trade and do many other things. Well, Vale knew that this wasn't all good because in those 10 years, there were horrendous diseases that were devastating the lives of communities, and the population was already declining significantly. And then on top of that, the captains of these sailing ships from all over the world were trading with the chiefs of Hawaii. And the number one thing that these chiefs wanted was guns and cannons and ammunition. And so in Hawaii, all of the warring factions were killing each other faster than ever before. It was a very difficult decade. Civil war has always been a part of our culture in Hawaii. It seems like going way back at least hundreds of years. But for the first time, there were Western weapons that could kill people even more quickly, exponentially. And then you add on top of that all of these dreadful diseases that nobody knew what to do anything about. People were dying like never before. 4 years after my great-great-great-great-grandmother Vale was born, in her district, not too far away, a little boy by the name of Opaka Heya was also born. And when Opaka Heya was about 10 years old, there were soldiers, warriors, that came into his village and just started killing people. He was able to grab his little brother, throw him on his back, and run as fast as he could once he realized what was happening. But his mother and father were both killed on that day. And one of the warriors saw him running at a distance and threw a spear and hit his young brother in his back and killed him instantly. Fortunately for Henry, he got away. And he went to go live with his aunt. And warriors later showed up there and killed his aunt right in front of him. So this was not only a difficult time in Hawaiian history and for the culture in general, but for Opaka Heya, this was a devastating time personally in his own family. So as Bill was sharing with us earlier, Opaka Heya had the opportunity to escape all of this, and he hopped on the boat Triumph, and he sailed to New England. He went many other places besides, but eventually ended up in New England, and Connecticut in particular. And he was able to hear the Christian gospel over and over, not only on the boat, but once he arrived in New England, and he was welcomed there with open arms, and he actually stayed with several prominent families, including the family of Timothy Dwight, who was the president of Yale. And he also happened to be one of the founders of the American Board of Commissioners of Foreign Mission. So somewhere in that time frame, Henry became a Christian, and some people say he was the first native Hawaiian to become a Christian, and we don't know for sure who the first one was, but he was certainly one of the very first. But what was really special about Henry is the more he learned about the Christian faith and the more he was educated in terms of reading and writing and philosophy and so many other things that he never had back in Hawaii, he wanted to bring these things back to Hawaii. And so he started sharing with some of his newfound friends and the families that he was living with and had been living with. And they were kind of getting excited, and they thought, well, maybe some of us will go with you. And we can bring God's love that is shared in the gospel through Jesus to the people of Hawaii. Well, unfortunately, Henry died before he had the opportunity to do that. In fact, it was February 17th, exactly 201 years ago today. But before he died, he wrote a book about his life. And the book started spreading throughout New England like wildfire, and people who knew him were telling stories about him. And those people that were thinking about coming to Hawaii were motivated by his death and his story. And so it was in 1819, the year after he died, that the first group of missionaries came to Hawaii. And many of you know the story. They landed in Kona, in Kailua, and King Kamehameha I, the Great, had just died the year before. And Ka'ahumanu, his favorite wife, his punahele, she became the kuhina nui, or the co-regent, with Kamehameha II. And together, mostly the women of that society, and eventually with the support of Kamehameha II, they abolished the traditional Hawaiian religion and demanded that all the temples be dismounted. And so there are still temple mounds today, and you can see those heiau throughout the islands. But in 1819, the Hawaiian royalty basically said, no more Hawaiian religion. And that was, of course, devastating for the Hawaiian people. But the very next year, the missionaries arrived and started sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ and God's love as explained and lived through the life of Jesus. And it took a little while for it to catch on, but eventually Christianity spread like wildfire throughout the Big Island and Oahu, and soon there were Christian churches in almost every single community throughout Hawaii. When I think of Henry Opaka Heya, they basically gave him the name Henry, I think when he arrived in New England or on the boat, but they couldn't say Opu Kahaia. So don't worry, Bill, if you call him Henry O, many people call him Henry O. But when he got to Connecticut, it was just, there's no way they were going to say that right, so they started calling him Henry. In fact, Henry was his first name, and Obukaya, because they couldn't say Opu Kahaia, it was his name, so Henry Obukaya is what they called him. But anyway, as I think about his life and how just absolutely horrifying it must have been to know that your mother and father were killed in this violent raid from warriors from the north part of the island, and then to actually see your aunt be killed, who took you in after you became an orphan, and then for him to have his baby brother killed while he was on his back as he was running away. And then just to know that people in his village and all over Hawaii were dying because of warfare and because of diseases, I asked myself this week, what must it have been that sustained him? And what moved him from despair and grief and sadness to a place of hope and a place of courage, a place of forgiveness? Because he was willing to forgive the people who killed his family and who were trying to forgive him. He wanted to bring the love of God and the forgiveness of Jesus to all people. And as I was asking myself that question this week, it occurred to me that all three of our scripture lessons we read this morning really answer that question. Jeremiah, the first Psalm, and then John's Gospel. So Jeremiah begins by saying that people of faith, or the faith that we have as God's people, is like an unending supply of water for a tree. And I'm sure most of you know that without water, a tree cannot survive. However, there's this deep, deep root system that most trees have, depending on where they happen to be, because they all kind of adapt to their own environment. But even if it's not raining for months during droughts, those trees, through their root systems, can find moisture and water and survive. Well, Jeremiah actually takes it a step further and says that our faith as people of God is like being a tree planted right next to a stream, where the water is just constantly flowing, a never-ending supply, and we have that. as people of faith, people of God. And then the psalmist in Psalm 1 actually takes that up to another level by saying, not just one tree, not just one stream, but multiple trees and multiple streams. And as I think I was in junior high when I had to memorize the first psalm, and it's always been one of my favorites, but I didn't understand it back then because it talks about how it is the law of the Lord, and those who meditate on the law of the Lord, and those who find pleasure and delight in the law of the Lord, are those who are like trees planted by streams. And to me, when I hear the word law, even law of the Lord, I think of what most of us probably think of when we hear the word law. We think of attorneys, courts, police officers, justices of the peace, protectors of the peace. And that's not at all what people heard when they first read those words. The law of the Lord is actually not translated very well, at least in all of the English translations that I've read, because the law of the Lord actually meant the Torah. And when people in Jesus' day, and for centuries before that, heard the phrase, the law of the Lord, they thought of the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And yes, there are some laws in there. There's some rules, some commandments. But basically, the broad umbrella, the big picture, is that this is the story of God's people trying to figure it out together on a journey. It's the story of who people were, who their ancestors were, what they experienced, how they got to be where they were at the time. And so when we hear those words, those who meditate on the law of the Lord, it's really saying we find nurture and strength when we focus on the big story. And it's so important when we remember who we are, what our story is, what our identity is, and most importantly, that on the journey, God keeps showing up, even during those dry periods of drought when those trees are just craving water. So when you read the first psalm, don't think law of the Lord in terms of, oh, those who know all the commandments, those who obey and follow all the rules. I'm not saying don't follow the rules, by the way. But that's just such a small part of what the psalm is about. If you look at the big picture, it's about knowing who you are, knowing the story of your people, your family, your nation, your church, and holding on to what is most important there. And most importantly, knowing that God keeps showing up throughout the entire story. Think about it. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, going back to Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. I didn't say they were all perfect people and did all the right things, but they're all part of the story. And then you've got Noah and his family. You've got, oh my goodness, Abraham and his children and grandchildren, and the story of Joseph going to Egypt and the people of God going down there and becoming slaves and escaping through the Exodus. It's the big story. The commonality is God keeps showing up. And let me tell you, those were not easy times. Over and over and over, the Bible presents this journey of God's people as being really tough. But again, God keeps showing up in love, in compassion, and giving people the faith that they need to get through those really difficult and challenging times in their lives. Now, a couple things occurred to me as I was reading both of these passages this week. So we have in Jeremiah one tree, one stream, and then we have in the Psalm multiple trees, multiple streams. And I just want to say that I get the fact that faith is and can be and ought to be a very personal thing. I don't think that my faith and all of my practices and all the ways I understand God are exactly like anyone else's here. I'm going to share with you a book that I read that was one of the best books in terms of understanding this. It's called Soul Prince by Mark Gaffney. And I forget when it came out. I read it years ago. But the basic gist is every one of us has a print in here that's just like our thumbprint or our fingerprint. Each and every one of us are unique. And how we experience faith is different from anyone else. And that's okay, because that's the way God created us. But on the other hand, multiple trees and multiple streams. Now, I could talk about this for a full hour, but I promise you I won't, so you can relax. But I do want to say that it is so important to me that I have others around me that keep me going in my faith. That I have others that might look different, see different, pray differently, but you know what? I need you. As different as you may be from me, I need you and I need other people, because my faith grows because of you and because of your difference. I'm reminded of when I lived in Utah. I was surrounded by aspen groves, and somebody once said to me, "You know, Alan, those aspen are the largest single living organisms on Earth." And I thought, what? A tree that's this big, that tall? It can't be. I mean, they're tiny compared to the redwoods and the sequoias. And they said, this entire aspen grove is one living unit, all connected underground, all sharing the same basic, I don't think they said DNA, but you get the point. It's one creature. And I remember looking up aspen, and I found out that it's actually true. When you look at an aspen grove, there can be hundreds or literally thousands of trees that are all part of one living unit, all sharing the same stuff that makes them unique, but every tree is a little bit different. In fact, the biggest one that's ever been found, the largest, is called Pando, right in almost the dead center of the state of Utah. And scientists believe, get this, that grove of aspen trees has been around for something like 80,000 years. The very first trees started coming up through the earth around the time of the last ice age. And there's actually, I think it said 40,000 trees in this aspen grove that are all connected underground in the same root system. It's all one living being. Something like 13 million pounds. I mean, it's just massive. And I remember as I was reading that, I thought, what if we all could look at every other human being as unique, like a unique tree, but we're all connected. And the health of every other tree is important to me, because that has to do with my health as well. And the well-being and the happiness of every tree is important to me, because that has to do with my well-being and happiness. And as I thought about this, I just started imagining what the world would be like in terms of politics and economics and religion and so many other things if we all understood humanity as connected like that. And then, of course, we read from the Gospel of John today, the words of Jesus, "I am the vine, you are the branches." We are connected. We're connected to each other and to God and to Jesus, whether we realize it or not. And the key is to realize it and live like you realize it. And you know, when those really difficult times, those dry times of drought come in your life, when you know that you're that connected, your faith will be sustained. When you know you're that connected, there will be joy, even in the midst of grief and sorrow and despair that's just temporary. I leave you with these images of the trees and the water, because we are those trees, and the water is our faith. Amen.